And joining us now, Demir Delen. He is the former president of the Canadian Turkish Association, and we're grateful you could come into TVO tonight and help us with this as well.
Thank you.
Our previous guest, Aris Babikian, has called the events that took place 94 years ago the Armenian Genocide. What do you call the events that took place 94 years ago?
Well, genocide is a very powerful and legal word. At least I don't call it genocide, but we acknowledge the death and suffering of hundreds of thousands of Armenians in tragic events that happened during war, the First World War in Eastern Anatolia, which is part of Turkey right now. And what maybe Mr. Babikian is saying, or most Armenians are trying to put, is just one side of the story where obviously the Armenian deaths, but there's at least equal amount or more of Turkish and Muslim people who died in the region at the same time during this conflict. And when you acknowledge those and look at those, they're tragic events that we really have to learn from it, get lessons out of it, so that these kind of ultra-nationalist behavior that caused total uprooting of families and communities do not happen again.
Well, you're right. Words are powerful, but that's why I want to understand what words you use. They say Armenian genocide. What do you say?
I don't use a genocide because genocide means that there is an intent to destroy a racial, national, religious, ethnical group.
I get that. I'm going to come to that. What do you call it, though?
I call it whatever, tragic events, conflict, suffering.
Let's open up the lens of the camera a little bit wider and have you tell us how far back in history before the events of 94 years ago do you think we need to go in order to understand the picture more completely?
Okay. Well, let's look at back from the 14th century maybe, or the Armenians, the Ottoman Empire had this millet system where they gave all the ethnic communities their freedom of religion. And Armenians were, lived together within the Ottoman Empire at least 400 years before these events happened. And they were in fact called what's Milleti Sadıka, which means the loyal millet, the most privileged of all the ethnic communities. Until in the late 19th century was when British and the Russians start meddling in the Ottoman Empire affairs. And you might remember or know the term sick man of Europe. That's what Ottoman Empire was called at that time by the Russian Tsar. And there's a famous story happening that he indicated to George Hamilton about the sick man of Europe is slipping out of our hands, and we have to make the necessary arrangements, which means, partitioning and the land. And to accomplish that, they started agitating the ethnic groups, including, the Slavic ones in the Balkans and Armenians in the Caucasus, which then led to the formation of some Armenian terrorist organizations like Hunchak and Dashnak. And then the opportune time was the First World War. Now, the events we're talking about that the Armenians call genocide, which is April 24th, 1915, let's put it into a little bit of broad perspective in a historical context. It's in the middle of First World War. The Ottoman Empire, starting with November of 1914, the British were occupying Basra and moving from the south to Baghdad, which were today's Iraq, but it was Ottoman Empire at that time. So the empire was being occupied from the south. And on the east, the Russians started advancing. And on the west in 1915, people might know as the Gallipoli Wars, the naval attack to the Dardanelles area started, the British and Allied forces, ending with the wars of Gallipoli. So within that context, with the agitation of Russians, Armenia starts rebelling.
And you're going to forgive me if I nudge you along here, because time is always the enemy in television. Is it your view that Armenia made common cause with Russia against the Ottoman Empire, and therefore that's why Ottomans at the time targeted Armenians as they did?
Well, yes. And the decision that was taken, the significance of April 24th, 1915 date was the date the Interior Ministry of the Ottoman Empire sent a circular to the governors of the areas in the eastern province where Armenians were rebelling, basically to arrest the leaders of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation and to close, the branches and the head office. The relocation order came about a month later. Eventually they decided to relocate the Armenians in that area to other parts.
Why did they do that?
Well, because this was the war area. And
But were Armenians not seen as, I mean, well, you just said it, they were always seen as loyal citizens within the empire before that.
But that was until 1860s or 70s. From
so that
then
changed
on,
everything.
That changed everything, and there was a lot of Armenian attack and rebellions in villages. And the Armenian chiefs indicated that were in the Russian army that there were at least 120,000 Armenians that were within the Russian army. Russian soldiers were Armenians.
Were there also not Armenians in the Ottoman Empire
Sure,
army?
that's right.
There were.
But when these relocation orders were given, none of the Armenians in the western provinces, in the bigger cities, were touched. In fact, the foreign ministry of the Ottoman Empire was an Armenian at that time. So this cannot be an intent to destroy a nation or a religious or an ethnic group. It's just relocation of the Armenians that are agitating in the war area.
In which case, give us your understanding of how you believe the hundreds of thousands, some say more than 1 million Armenians died at the time.
Well, that number of Armenians died as well as the Turks. A couple of reasons. One, during the relocation, now you have to understand the context again. This is wartime, and in 1915 we don't have the transportation means of that time. There's famine, there's disease, plus there were attacks by certain revenge attacks by Turkish or Kurdish tribes of all the things that were happening at that time. That's why I'm calling it's happening both sides, and there were tragic events that we have to analyze and learn from it. But trying to calling it a genocide with really political declarations shuts up the debate.